In the year 1066 occurred the other memorable date in English history, viz. William the Conqueror, 1066. This is also called the Battle of Hastings. When William the Conqueror landed, he lay down on the beach and swallowed 2 mouthfuls of sand. This was his first conquering action and was in the south. Later, he ravaged the north as well. The Norman conquest was a good thing, as from this time onwards, England stopped being conquered and thus was able to become top nation. So says W.C. Seller and R.G. Yeatman's classic 1066 and all that. And who am I to disagree? Welcome to The Rest is History with me, Dominic Sandbrook, romantic, freedom-loving heir of the Anglo-Saxons, and grey, grim Tom Holland and Norman to his fingertips.
Thanks, Dominic, for that introduction. Do you know, I have actually played William the Conqueror on national TV.
Of course you have.
So, yes, so I am a sleek, evil Norman to my clean-shaven chops.
So when people mistake you for actor Tom Holland, I mean, you are actor.
Yes,
Tom
I am
Holland,
an actor.
Right? I mean, he's the impersonator.
Well, I think that anyone who saw my performance as William of Normandy would accept that it was a magnificent thespian performance.
Yes, his casting by Marvel was just a colossal case of mistaken identity, right? I mean,
yeah,
they've seen
much.
your William the Conqueror.
Pretty much. He's taken the time to get onto the Spider-Man jokes, but we finally, after 45 episodes, we got onto them. So well done on your restraint.
Herculean self-restraint on my part.
Yeah, it's been heroic.
So, Tom, when I was at school, like you, like probably a lot of our listeners, I learned that there was one date that you had to know in English history. It's the defining date in all English history, 1066. Now, do you think that it deserves its place, first of all?
Well, we have a question on that, don't we, from Richard Duval, who asks, is 1066 a genuine pivot point in English history? And I think...
So give us a sense of what happened, I suppose.
Okay, so before we come to that, essentially, I think it is because it's a kind of great scorch mark across the line of medieval English history. And on the one side, you have the period that we call, maybe controversially, the Anglo-Saxon period. And then we have the period from which we start dating our kings and queens. So there were lots of, there were at least 2 Edwards who ruled as King of England before the Norman conquest. But we start counting Edwards from the 13th century. And that's just a kind of a single indicator of the way in which essentially the Norman conquest serves to completely reorient everything. And I think 1066 matters and is indeed decisive because over the course of the millennium since, people have seen it as such. And so have kind of constructed entire mythologies around it. The idea, very popular in the 17th century, of the Norman yoke. The idea that England has never been invaded since, which of course isn't true, but it establishes an idea of England as freedom-loving that has incredible influence through the 19th and 20th century. So I think it matters for those reasons. But it's also, I think it matters in the context of the 11th century, because essentially what the Normans represent is this kind of revolutionary movement which is escalating on the continent at the same time as the Norman invasion. And it's both a military revolution and a religious revolution. And the Norman conquest is very much a part of that story. So we might get onto that later on. I
would never have believed you would have found a way to fit religion and religious revolutions into the story of 1066.
But this is
fantastic work, Tom.
This is the 11th century.
It is.
The 11th century is it was not just very religious. This is the great seismic, this is the moment of revolution, the papal revolution that transforms the medieval world.
There is no century that you don't say that of, though.
No, the 11th century, I've always said, is the revolutionary century. And I think it makes sense to see 1066 in that kind of broader perspective.
Let me try and put you back on your leash. Tell us what happened in 1066 in about 10 sentences.
Okay,
so
I'll
the
try.
Whole sweep, if that's doable.
There's a reason why students, when they go to secondary school, study it in year 7, because it's a very inherently dramatic story. And basically, it's a kind of 3-way Game of Thrones. You've got Harold Godwinson, son of an overmighty earl. You have Harold Hardrada, Harold the Hard Ruler, the King of Norway, and you have William, the Duke of Normandy, the most kind of terrifyingly able man in France, all of whom essentially have their eyes on the Crown of England. And the Crown of England becomes available on the 5th of January 1066, when the previous king, Edward the Confessor, dies childless. And so there is this massive scramble. Harold Godwinson has himself crowned very rapidly in the newly built abbey at Westminster. This provokes William to fury, because William thinks that both Edward the Confessor and Harold are committed to him succeeding to the throne. Meanwhile, Harold Godwinson's brother Tostig has had a massive bust-up, has left England in a huff, has gone off to Norway, where he's talked to Harold Hardrada, a terrifying Viking of the old school, persuaded him that he could come over and grab the throne. So over the course of 1066, you have these three men all competing for the throne. It's in the shadow of Halley's Comet, a sure portent of doom and disaster. Harold Godwinson is stationed on the south coast of England, waiting for the Normans to invade. Contrary winds stop William from crossing the Channel. While he's down there, he's brought the news that Harold Hardrada and Tostig have invaded, have sailed up the Humber, have defeated the Earls of Northumbria and Mercia, have seized York. Harold Godwinson marches at a furious speed, takes Tostig and Harold Hardrada by surprise, defeats them at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. He's just breathing a deep sigh of relief when he's informed that the Normans have landed on the south coast. So he hares back down there, meets them at a hill some 7 miles north of Hastings. A battle is fought all day. Harold ends up dead. William ends up, waits for the Anglo-Saxon nobility to accept him. They don't, so he starts to ravage the south. This is sufficiently effective that on Christmas Day, 1066, he is able to have taken possession of London, and on that day he is crowned in Westminster Abbey as King of England. So it's an incredibly dramatic story, and I'm sure, again, part of the reason why it has this seismic role in English history is simply that it's so dramatic, and in lots of ways unusual.
It's a great story. Well done, Tom. That was a bravura performance. And it is a kind of Game of Thrones, isn't it? But what's interesting to me about it, just thinking about it before we're recording, is that the sort of in the popular imagination, there's this sort of period of bucolic Anglo-Saxon peace, and then these bastards arrive from Normandy and burn everything and smash everything up, and the Norman conquest is this great traumatic rupture. But the interesting thing is that England is very rich. England is very, has a very sort of potent state, so it's very good at raising taxes, and it has the sort of shires and all the rest of it. But England has kind of been up for grabs for a while. So England has been invaded by the Danes. It's been run by Canute. It's been part of the North Sea Empire. And the Norman influence has been getting stronger in England for decades, hasn't it, before the Norman conquest? So Edward the Confessor is half Norman. He's got Norman friends. He's given lands to some Normans. In a way...
Yeah, and Harold Godwinson is half Scandinavian. So
exactly. So isn't this basically... England is going to be taken over by one of these two sort of powers, either Norway or Normandy, both but Viking powers, basically. And it's inevitable. Do you not think? Do you think there's it's going to be dragged into the orbit, either of Scandinavia or of Normandy and France? And the only question is which?
I think it was always going to be that of France. I think it was always going to be, because of this the scale of this ongoing kind of revolutionary ferment in France. But you're right that it is also... essentially, England is too rich and too successful. It sounds an odd thing to say, but the unitary kingdom of England that gets founded in the 10th century is incredibly precocious by the standards of the rest of Europe, where this kind of centralised nation-state doesn't really exist. And you mustn't overemphasise the centralisation. The north is very roughly controlled, but it is... There are recognised boundaries. There's a single faith. There's almost a kind of single language. The dialects are kind of pretty much mutually intelligible. There's a single religion. There's a single king, and there are these kind of incredible abilities to raise taxes. So it's by the standards of other lands very, very wealthy. But that's a problem because you're surrounded by robbers. So it's kind of like walking through, a place where there are lots of muggings with wearing a kind of, wearing diamonds or something. I mean, it's kind of asking for trouble. And the Vikings, this is incredibly appealing to them, of course. So they come over, and it's in the reign of Ethelred the Unready. Canute establishes his reign, absolutely. Essentially, that Harold Hardrada, in that sense, is kind of old school, because what he's doing, Vikings have been doing pretty much since the raid on Lindisfarne, is basically kind of come in and grab stuff. William, I think, is different, because he although Harold Hardrada is Christian, and indeed is the half brother of the man who will become Norway's patron saint, Saint Olaf. He's Christian in the sense that everyone has to be Christian.
So he doesn't believe it. I don't think he's not a turning the other cheek man.
He's very much not a turn the other cheek man. For William, it's different, because William really passionately believes that God wants him to have the throne, and that Edward the Confessor, I think he's right to do this. I think Edward the Confessor had promised him the throne. Harold Godwinson, in a famous episode that appears on the Bayeux Tapestry, a year or so before 1066, has been shipwrecked and essentially rescued by William from captivity. He has sworn an oath on the bones of saints that he will back William's right to the throne. And William,
or is that a story just told by propagandists?
I don't think so.
How true is that?
I think it's.
You think it's real?
Yeah, I think it is, because I don't think Harold would have got away otherwise. I mean, the debate is over why Harold has gone there. So the English sources say that it's to ransom some captives, some hostages that William has, and the Normans say that he's been sent there by Edward the Confessor. I think the English sources there are probably truer, but I think it's pretty clear that Harold did do it. And the reason that Harold does this is because he doesn't take it seriously. So there's a fabulous description of him in one of the in the life of Edward the Confessor, written a decade or so after 1066, where it refers to his watchful mockery that he takes from ambush to ambush. And I think there's the sense that he feels it doesn't really matter. And I think more than that he's in Normandy, he's able to scope out William and exactly calculate what he is up against. But the problem for Harold is that William is signed up to the idea that essentially, if he is going to England, he will be doing so as the agent of God, and as proof of that.
So he's got a papal banner.
He has a papal banner, which is very shocking, because it's none of the business of the papacy to intervene in this kind of thing. This is a period where the reach of the papacy is nothing like what it becomes even within a decade or so, because this is the period where reformers in Rome are starting to use the papacy as a way to bring the whole of Christendom to heel, as they see it, to subject it to a process of reformatio. And England is a massive prize. England is a kind of ancient Christian country, but the Archbishop of Canterbury, a guy called Stigand, is absolutely representative of everything that the reformers in Rome dislike. He's corrupt. He holds multiple benefices. He does not take his faith seriously at all. And so the chance to bring England to heel is hugely, hugely tempting. And the guy behind the Pope, who essentially persuades the Pope, Alexander II, to give a banner with a papal blessing to William, is a guy called Hildebrand, who in due course will become Pope Gregory VII. And Gregory VII is the great revolutionary pope of the 11th century. And he's the guy who, at Canossa Castle in the north of the Apennines, will get Henry IV, the emperor himself, to kneel in the snow and humble himself. And essentially the humbling of Harold is a part of this. And people who are opposed to what Gregory VII are doing, opposed to what the reformers are doing, opposed to this policy of essentially kind of shaking Christendom up, cleansing it, purifying it, making it more truly Christian, they compare Gregory VII, Hildebrand's approach to Henry IV, and they cast it as kind of rebellion, as upstart behaviour, as revolutionary behaviour, and they explicitly compare it to what William had done to Harold. You know, the murder and dismemberment of a Christian king.
Yeah.
So I think that is a massive, massive part of the context for it. And that's why when, after the Battle of Hastings, William builds a great abbey on the site where Harold fell. And the high altar, Battle Abbey. So Battle Abbey, the high altar is supposed to stand on the spot where Harold fell. And this is a gesture of penance that for William is a truly heartfelt one. And all the Normans who fought at Hastings have to do penance for the death that they inflicted. So there is a kind of sense.
So the Normans are they're more Christian. They wear their Christianity more heavily than Harold and the Godwinsons and their sort of hangers-on and henchmen. Is that fair?
I think so. They are militant in their Christianity.
Okay.
In a terrifying way.
And a sort of allied question. So lots of novelists, I think of Julian Rathbone wrote a book on this called The Last English King. Lots of novelists have written about this. And of course, it's the stuff of children's history books. And we always attempted to project personalities onto these characters. So we're going to come to Harold Hardrada later because there's lots of questions about him. He's this amazing character. Harold Godwinson, for lots of people, is this kind of romantic hero, who falls in battle, basically after a massive fixture pile-up. And William is kind of, yes. You played him, so you know yourself. So he's kind of this grim, very political, very intense, supremely competent, terrifying figure. How much of that do you think is us projecting personalities, sort of Hollywood style, onto these people who are basically, they're basically competing warlords, right? They're leaders of gangs. They're pretty scary people who now we would think of as kind of the equivalent of, Vladimir Putin and sort of they're tough guys. And are our modern impressions of them basically romantic inventions, do you think?
But they've been mythologized right from the beginning. So the image, so the story that Harold Hardrada is the hero of Icelandic saga. So there's all this stuff about how he goes off to Byzantium, how he fights dragons, how he has affairs with empresses, how he conquers the Holy Land. I mean, it's all totally made up. And it draws on the fact that Harold Hardrada, as a young man, did go to Constantinople, did clearly cut a tremendous dash with the Varangian Guard, came back with lots of cash, made himself, and with which he was able to win war bands and win the crown of Norway. I mean, clearly he's as my brother would say, a massive lad.
Like Neville Chamberlain.
Yeah, like Neville Chamberlain. He's a terrifying... I mean, of course he's a terrifying guy, and that's why people write epics about him. Harold Godwinson, likewise, is... I mean, this is a guy who's fighting the Welsh and gets given the head of the Welsh prince who he's been fighting and treats it as a trophy.
Yeah.
Now, to the Normans,
is he's kind of listening to poetry and holding hands with Edith, his wife.
Swanneck, yes, the beautiful.
Yeah, and he's loving kind of Anglo-Saxon traditions and all that. That's all balls, is it?
I think he's Harold Godwinson is a charismatic man. He must have been to win the support. Essentially, Harold Godwinson is he's a kind of a decent Richard III. He's a usurper, like Richard III. There is an atheling, a man, a prince who should become king in the form of Edgar. Edgar is the grandson of Edmund Ironside, the English king who fought Canute and then died. Edmund Ironside's son had been brought up in Hungary. He'd come back to England. He died almost immediately. Edgar is the son. He's only about 13 in 1066, so he's not really able to have the crown. But even so.
He's the rightful heir.
Harold Godwinson elbows him out of the way. I mean, but doesn't kill him or anything. So he's a nice Richard III. But he's a charismatic man to persuade all the other noblemen to sign up to that.
But a usurper is only remembered as a usurper if they then lose, aren't they? If they're a usurper and they win, then they're just part of the canon. So no one thinks of them as usurpers.
And also it's more confused because the laws around who becomes king is it's more up for grabs. Essentially, it's an elective office, and you then get it sealed with a coronation. So Harold, he's elected king. So he clearly is charismatic, and I think you get the sense from that thing of him, the watchful mockery. I think that's written within his lifetime, and I think that's clearly true to the style that he brings to to kingship. He's an amused kind of man. William, I mean, he's terrifying because he's terrifyingly able, and he's terrifying in the way that very, very competent revolutionaries are invariably terrifying. And the thing is that the revolution is not just religious, it's also military, because this in France, this is the age of two very, very significant developments, one of which is the realization, particularly in Anjou, who William fights against for decades before he launches his attack on England. The Angevins recognize that you can use castles as tools of oppression.
Yes.
So they start...
There's no word in English for castles,
No.
is there, when the
No.
Normans come over?
No.
People don't know what they are.
No, they've got no idea. Whereas all along the Loire, the early chateaux are going up, and essentially the Angevin counts are able to use these chateaux as ways of establishing themselves as kind of power. They come from almost nowhere to become the major power in central France. And the Normans pick up on this very, very quickly, the scope for castles. And William, as a boy, he becomes duke very, very young. So he has to put up with all the noblemen whacking castles up all over the place. And he spends his early years essentially breaking that power. So he's very, very alert to the use that castles play. And he's able to do that because he is a Norman, and the Normans are kind of proficient at the other great development, which is the use of horses as a tool of oppression. So you've got castles and horses, and these are, of course,
knights,
chevalier
right?
Knights. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I mean, essentially, to be in the neighbourhood with the Normans is like being stuck in a bottle with a hornet. These are terrifying in the way that the Spartans were terrifying, or the Romans of the mid-Republic were terrifying. These are people who are completely organised for war, who live and breathe it. William has been in the saddle training for war since he was a boy. And the Anglo-Saxons, although they fight a lot, are not organised for war in that way. And they do not have castles. They have kind of wooden halls that are unprotected. So that is what enables the Norman conquest to work, is that they are introducing this terrifying military technology which is transforming France, and which England is very, very vulnerable to.
So, Tom, we're going to have to take a break in a second and then do the questions. But before we do that, I want to ask you what you think about this. So England has become quite a potent unitary state, the most united, the most sophisticated sort of governing apparatus really in Europe. And some people say the first European nation state, partly under threat from Viking invasions. So because of the Viking invasions, because the constant need to raise money to fight them off and to sort the defences out and stuff, English kings before 1066 have created, with their thanes and whatnot, this great state that makes it a prize. So you can decapitate the king and you can take it over, and then you'll be very rich. Hurrah, hurrah. So the question is, why haven't they created a technological military apparatus to go along with that? So in other words, why are they behind? If they are ahead of other European sort of states in tax raising and all that stuff, why are they behind technologically in military terms? Is it because to do with the geography? Is it because they're only having to fight Vikings? What's the reason?
It's precisely because the English state is as unitary as it is, that the king, or at least the earls who rule the former kingdoms of Wessex and Mercia and East Anglia and Northumbria have sufficient authority that people who give them any shit will come to a grisly end. That is not what happens in France. In France, the power of the king shrivels and shrivels and shrivels until it's just focused on the Ile de Paris. And that means that all the duchies are essentially kind of fair game for anyone who wants to grab it. So you have a state of kind of organised anarchy across what will become the Kingdom of France, and this is a breeding ground for oppression.
Innovation,
so it's kind of like one city where you have mob rule, you have the mafia. The mafia become incredibly good at extorting stuff, and then they muscle into a city where there's no mafia at all. And suddenly all the shopkeepers are having to, they have no protection against it. And that essentially is the situation, that there's no need for castles or knights in England because you have the unitary monarchy. But that's precisely what makes it as so vulnerable.
So in a weird way, competition, the sort of anarchic competition of life in France, breeds innovation and success, basically. Britain is almost a victim of its own... Well, it's a victim of a different kind of success.
Yeah, and this kind of potent new form of I mean, it is oppression with the knights and the castles. It's not just England that and in the due course Scotland and Ireland that suffers from it. It's also in Italy. So Norman adventurers travel there. They conquer southern Italy. They conquer the Muslim state in Sicily. They invade the Balkans. They give the Byzantine Emperor an incredibly bloody nose in the Balkans, and then they provide the cutting edge for the First Crusade. So these are quite simply the best warriors in Europe.
Yeah. And England is one of their victims.
England is just
the most high-profile victim.
England is the most, and that's why the Norman conquest is so unusual. The fact that a band of men can move in and take over an entire kingdom, nothing really quite like it happens apart from the Norman conquest.
Perfect point to take a break, Tom, and we can go and sharpen our swords and build our castles and stuff, and then we'll come back and do the questions. See you in a minute. Welcome back to The Rest is History. In podcasting terms, we've seen off the Norwegians at Stamford Bridge, and now we're marching desperately south to find the Normans have landed at Pevensey with a ton of questions, and we're going to get through them now.
So like arrows falling onto us.
Exactly. It's from Danny Kay, and we've sort of addressed this a bit, but he says, why, despite a relatively well-developed state, was England such an easy target for invaders? We've kind of answered that, but we haven't answered his follow-up, which is, what did the Normans do to change that? So why does it change? Why don't more people invade England after the Normans have landed? Why doesn't everybody else pile in and try to take England from them, Tom?
Well, because there are castles. So, there are kind of Viking kings who do have a kind of little nibble at England after 1066.
Right.
But what can they do? I mean,
So the Normans are simply too fearsome. Once they've got possession, you can't dislodge them.
Well, they rush around putting castles up everywhere. Right. And I think one of the reasons that Harold Godwinson, when he comes south from Stamford Bridge, rather than resting and waiting for more troops to come, as he probably should have done, is so desperate to march on William, is that he's been in Normandy, so he sees what the Normans can do with their castles, and he knows that even a few very rough castles put up are almost impossible to remove. So I think he's rushing down to try and stop that from happening. And of course, the moment that William's become king, he's sending his liegemen out. They are putting up the castles, and once the castles have gone up, there's no one who can pull them down, because the Normans have the military technology that prevents anyone from competing them. And I think that's true for the Vikings as well.
So that raises an interesting question. If the Vikings had taken England, if Harald Hardrada had taken England, do you think ultimately the Normans would have won anyway, because they have so much technology?
I think at some point that technology would have crossed, yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting... I mean, I kind of agree. I mean, that's an interesting thing, isn't it? The argument is that this is a pivotal moment because it brings England into the Norman and then the French orbit. But I suppose the ultimate point, surely, is that England would have been claimed by that orbit at some point in the next couple of hundred years anyway.
I think within the next few decades. Because I think that the lethal quality of the military technology that had been developed in France and the militant quality of the papal revolution meant that England couldn't be allowed to kind of drift along as it was.
And it's sort of like the same question about the English language, isn't it? I mean, it's often said this is a pivotal moment in the evolution of English, that it absorbs French words and that sort of stuff. But I mean, I suppose you could argue that France's cultural gravitational pull meant that at some point in the next few hundred years, English was bound to take in lots of French words because of trade, because of cultural contacts.
Yeah, I think so.
There would have been court contacts and stuff like that. Okay, let's have another question. I'll ask it again, I guess. Chet Archbold. So Chet is a friend of the show. We're very used to Chet's questions. Chet says he wants to know who was Edward's lawful heir. Can we resolve that? And Well, he's asked 3 questions. My gosh. Let's do the Edward's lawful heir first.
Edgar Atheling, I think, was the lawful heir.
But it doesn't matter, does it? Because it's irrelevant who the lawful heir was, right?
Yeah.
At this time,
Yeah.
ever since, there's been Danish invasions, the crown has been changing hands lots. I mean, it's kind of, and it's not the right question, I guess. And
except that, there is a kind of sacral quality to the line of Alfred, which Edgar belongs to. So it's the House of Wessex, and that's Edgar is the House of Wessex guy, but
he could never have got it, right? Because he was too young.
But he's an Atheling, and everyone calls him Atheling, and Atheling means deserves to be king,
crown prince almost.
Yeah, yes, but with the sense that you have the right to become king. So
why does no one speak up for him when Edward the Confessor, breathes his last?
Because he's
13.
13.
They're all frightened of Harold Godwinson.
Yeah, because he's 13. Because they know that they don't want the Normans. They don't trust Edgar to stand against the Normans. Harold is a general of proven ability. So they're rallying to the guy who will keep England English.
So choosing Harold is not this kind of weird, illegitimate. They've been intimidated by Godwinson kind of mobs. It's a completely reasonable, legitimate choice.
Yes, it is.
Okay, good, because that's what I think. What about Chet's next question? He asks about class. So there is this argument that people called, let's say, Glanville are more likely to be rich because they're descended from the Normans than people called Smith, who are likely to be, still kind of, working class, sort of salt of the earth Britons. Do you buy this? Do you think the Norman conquest has left a class system that has endured for?
I do.
A millennium.
Yes,
you do.
I do. Yes,
I do.
I do. Do you not? I mean, I think statistically, there was some study published a couple of years ago.
Yes, there was. Exactly. That's what I'm thinking of.
So I'm very happy to go along with that.
The people with Norman names,
are Montgomery.
Supposedly...
Monty was very proud of being.
I don't know. I'm a bit dubious about this, to be honest with you. But I think it's definitely. I mean, you made the point in the first half of the show that it's definitely what it's actually clearly made a difference to is our sense of class. If not the reality, then our understanding of it. So our sense of a sort of dualism between haves and have-nots, between a ruling class and an oppressed mass. I mean, that's there before Marx or anything like that. That's there in the
that's there in the Middle Ages,
isn't it?
It's there, and it's there in the Middle Ages, and it's hugely influential. I mean, it's kind of growing up there by the 14th, 15th centuries, as you say, the Norman yoke, and it's massive. We've already talked about Ivanhoe and Walter Scott. And that idea of there being a massive division between Normans and English. And
that's not made up. That's real. I mean,
I think it is made up. I think it is made up. I think that, certainly by the time that John loses Normandy in the 13th early 13th century,
by then
everyone is thinking of themselves as English.
But for a long time, Tom, maybe a couple of 100 years, there is a sense of England is 1.5 million people, and the Normans have come over, and we're talking about tens of thousands, maybe 20,000, 15,000 or something. Yeah, they have all the land, they have all the power. I mean, they are a ruling class, right?
You get this with the first English historians to write about it, William of Malmesbury, and who talks about. New faces everywhere enjoying England's riches and gnawing at her vitals.
Makes me sick. It makes me sick to hear this stuff.
And you've got Henry of Huntingdon, who says that God basically has invented the Normans to wipe out the English. So so that sense is very real. But I think it fades pretty. It's gone by the 13th century, I think.
And the Normans basically now see themselves as English. Because I suppose they're fighting the French, right? So they're defining themselves against the French, do you think?
Yes, they are, absolutely. Yes, they are. But what also happens is, say with the Peasants' Revolt, you're getting peasants there who are mythologising the Norman conquest to explain their sufferings.
What about Chet's final question, which is about would England have looked more to Scandinavia than France? I mean, I think that's the question that people often ask. If it had gone otherwise, would England effectively be part of Scandinavia? And would we be eating cinnamon buns, fantastic mid-century furniture. Very we'd have very generous pensions and pay colossal taxes.
Yeah, so if they'd won, we would all be listening to ABBA and shopping at IKEA. Oh,
Yeah.
we are.
Yeah,
So
well,
it didn't make any difference.
You see, I love this because I'm a real Scandiophile, so I kind of think, if only Hardrada had won, it'd be great.
We'd all be
just, like,
watching
somewhere.
miserable dramas about
The Bridge.
detectives. Oh, we are. No, I think that, as we've discussed, I think that the gravitational pull of France would have been too great. And we can tell that because the same is true of Scandinavia. The Scandinavian kingdoms likewise start building Gothic cathedrals and going on crusade and having knights and castles and things. So it's a cultural pull that I think was not to be resisted. Okay, here's one for you on the subject of Norway. Yeah. This is from Stefan Jensen. Since I'm Norwegian, I of course have to ask, how close to a great and awesome Norwegian-led North Sea Empire was King Harold really before he lost at Hastings? Could he have made it, e.g. the timing had differed by a few weeks, or was it a doomed project from the beginning? So, could Harold Hardrada have won?
Because the example of Canute suggests that it wasn't necessarily doomed from the beginning, because Canute had a North Sea Empire. But I suppose the argument against it is that a North Sea Empire was liable to fragmentation. So Canute's empire breaks up, as we know. And maybe even if Hardrada had won, if he'd won at Stamford Bridge, if he'd then beaten William, which is, according to you, unlikely because of the technological gap, would England have remained as part of a North Sea empire, or would that empire have inherently fragmented because of its sort of
I think it would have fragmented,
scattered. Yeah, I mean, it's
also
hard
Harold
to
Hardrada was an old guy.
He's 50, isn't he? He's about 50 when he.
Yeah,
so
it's
he's
his
going to
last.
be dead in 5-10 years.
Yeah,
probably. And one of the things you get throughout this period, right, is a series of succession crises. So that's why the crown is swapping so much, and it's such a confusing story in the sort of 100 years before 1066. So there'd have been another succession crisis.
Well, I guess
of how Hardrada died, and what would have happened then?
Tostig, I guess.
Yeah, well, there would have been some other earl would have challenged him, and there would have been somebody would have pitched up from Norway, and it would have all have been a bit of a mess.
Tostig,
and then the Normans would have come over at some point, wouldn't they? And then the Normans would have had another go.
I mean, but clearly Tostig is thinking, I'm going to get the throne when Harold dies. I always had a soft spot for Tostig. Our cat,
Did you have a cat called Tostig?
Yes, our cat is named after him. So we had Harold, Tostig, and Edith. Harold wandered off, but we still got Tostig and Edith. So
Harold got off to swear an oath to some other.
Yes, he did. He did. He wandered off.
South London homeowner.
Yeah, he did. He's with some other home.
Oh, that's sad, Tom.
Watchful mockery.
What a traumatic moment.
Yeah, it is. But we still have Tostig. Okay, here's
so
another
Harold
one.
Hardrada, we've got another.
Here's another one for you. Patrick 851. Was William's real triumph ending the Viking way of war in favour of cavalry? If so, were the English exiles why were the English exiles so successful in the Mediterranean after they fled, e.g. the English Guard in Byzantium?
Yeah, so the English Guard in Byzantium, you'll know more about this than me, Tom. So they're basically, the Varangian Guard have been there for a while. They're the Emperor's kind of bodyguard, and they're recruited from Norsemen. They've often come down from sort of Kiev and Rus and all that sort of stuff, the sort of trade routes that the Norse have established going down into what's now Ukraine. But the Varangian Guard pick up a lot of Anglo-Saxon exiles, don't they? Am I right? After 1066?
Right. Yeah.
And they're sort of feared because of their strange moustaches and axes and their sort of hard drinking ways. They're basically football hooligans who've gone to Turkey, modern day, what's now Turkey, and sort of behaving badly and being fearsome and stuff.
The Varangian Guard go with the Byzantines to confront the Normans in the Balkans after 1066 and end up in a barn, and the Normans burn them to death. So
all right, so they're not as successful as all that.
They're not, unfortunately. But having said that, I think the housecarls, the personal guard around the English king, are simply the best infantry in Europe. So what you have at Hastings, they've
got the shield wall tactics, haven't they, and all that stuff.
This is kind of European Cup that they're going for. It's the best cavalry against the best infantry. And one of the things that's really unusual about Hastings is that it goes on all day. I mean, that's a really unusual for an ancient battle or a medieval battle. They're usually over in about an hour.
I mean,
and it goes,
one thing
lasts
you
all
underestimate is
day.
how exhausting.
Yeah.
They must have been absolutely... I mean, barely able to lift their weapons at the end, you would assume. A lot of them presumably just die because they're too tired to fight anymore.
Yeah, I think so. And also what's impressive is that both the Normans and the English at one point look as if they're going to break. So there's the rumour that William's been killed, and that then William takes his helmet off and rallies them. And then the Anglo-Saxons have run down the hill. Lots of them get killed, but they still don't break. And even when the shield wall breaks, they remain on the top. And that's essentially that's why the battle is so decisive, is that Harold doesn't flee. He stays where he is.
But Tom, the accounts of the battle, I mean, how much is that actually what happened, and how much of that is just sort of standard battle narrative, the formulae? I mean, people are always almost being killed in battles and lifting their helmets and saying, I'm still alive, and sort of staging feints and being chased and then coming back. And isn't that
the sources
always say about
the sources
battles?
relative to a medieval battle are pretty good for Hastings. You know, they're written by people who were there, or who witnessed it, or who talked to eyewitnesses, and you've got the Bay Tapestry. So obviously there are details that we don't know. It's mythologized. People can't know for sure. But I think the basic outline, and the thing about the Normans and then the English kind of breaking, is repeated in different ways in near contemporary sources. So they are not copying one another. They're clearly drawing on a sense that this had actually happened. So I'm happy with that. I think it happened.
But to just go back to the question for a second about the Varangian Guard and the English Guard in Byzantium, I think that's one of the most romantic stories in all history, actually. I love the Varangian Guard sort of stuff. So you've probably seen, I can't remember if we've talked about this in a previous podcast, the graffiti in Hagia Sophia. By Halfdan, I think. Isn't he called Halfdan? He's a sentry or something, and he scribbles on a pillar or I can't remember how he does it. He's etched it into the wall or something.
We really need to do a podcast on the Vikings in the East. It'd be great.
Well, we talked in a previous episode about Rosemary Sutcliffe's book Blood Feud, which is about an English boy who becomes a Varangian Guard, and he becomes a Viking, and he goes down the river, and he goes to Kiev, and then he ends up working for the Emperor. It's great stuff. We should do a podcast just about that book, actually. Anyway, let's do another question.
Okay, Rob Scott.
Do you want to pick one?
Yeah, Rob Scott. Is there any truth in the rumour that King Harold was shot in the balls rather than the eyeball? And that's quite absurd, isn't it? Because we're about to do one on eunuchs. So
yes, and our next
podcast. So Dominic, what's your take on the was King Harold shot in the eye mystery?
You project onto this what you want, really, but I think it's endured for so long. Partly because of that image in the tapestry. So as far as I can understand, some scholars now think that the image in the tapestry shows two stages of his death. So he's shot in the eye, then he falls, then he's
that's one.
butchered.
Yeah, or that he's holding a spear. That the guy with the arrow is holding a spear. So
I mean, I think the Harold shot in it's such a great story, and it's endured because it's a better story, isn't it, than he's just butchered on the ground. The shot in the eye, and because the shot in the eye introduces the element of contingency, so it makes it easier to see him as a romantic hero. If only the arrow hadn't hit him right in the eye, but maybe he could have prevailed. But
the other way of seeing
about it, isn't
that it's not contingency, that it's the judgment of God.
Well, I knew this was coming
because actually the earliest extant source says that, and this is where the testicles thing comes in, as it were, is that William sees Harold on the battlefield, and William gathers some men around him, and they go and attack Harold, and they butcher him, and they dismember him, and they hack off his testicles, and they behead him.
Right, nice.
And
nice.
I think that what's interesting about that is that that is not a tradition that gets picked up. And I think one of the reasons it doesn't get picked up is that it makes William look bad. Whereas William has cast Hastings as being, we're putting this before God. God will judge. And if the battle is finished, and the story that Harold gets shot in the eye are quite early. If that happens, then obviously it proves that God is on William's side. So I think that question, it's a really interesting one, gets caught up in the snarl of Norman propaganda and justification. They might have wanted to think that. And on the topic of romance and Harold, one from Pink Haze, is King Harold really buried at Waltham Abbey? I've been to both Battle and at Waltham Abbey and have seen what they assume is his grave, but is it him? So the story of what happens to Harold is terribly romantic.
Just don't know. Isn't there a claim that he's also at Bosham?
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
And there has been an argument about permission was refused, I think, to dig up a grave in Bosham to do DNA testing or something. I mean, what do you think, Tom? Do you have a definitive answer? I mean,
I don't know.
How can you?
I don't know. But the story. Well, again, the earliest thing is that William refuses to give the body of Harold to Harold's mother.
That's
and they
right.
make a
give
joke.
it to another Norman.
Yeah,
I think
they make a joke that Harold's body should be put on the foreshore, looking out to sea. And that's kind of interesting because Bosham is on the sea; it's on the Sussex coast. So maybe that's the thing. But there are a lot of medieval stories that he survives the battle and becomes a hermit.
I like that.
So I like that one.
So he'll come in. We've been told by the producer that we can only do one more question, so I think we should do two more questions just to sort of
assert,
just to assert some pathetic sort of vestige of power over our own podcast. So I think we should do Connor Moon's question because it's very crucial. If you can be very crucial. How, if at all, says Connor Moon, did life change for the submerged 9/10 of the population when Norman rule was established? Was it life as usual for the peasants, or were there big changes? And I guess that's a really huge question, isn't it? So you're living in a village somewhere in Lincolnshire or Herefordshire, how much does this actually matter to you? Is the replacement of one elite by another? Does it make a big difference in your life, Tom?
Well, I'll tell you who it does make a big difference for is the slaves, because about 1/10 of the population in Anglo-Saxon England are enslaved, and the Norman conquest effectively ends that. And there is evidence that William is ideologically opposed to slavery, that he regards it as being contrary to God's will. So you could cast the Norman invasion as an anti-slavery movement as well, which is something
well, you could.
extra
you could.
To throw into the mix. Okay, and so on that topic of what gets lost with the Norman conquest, here's one from Tim Vasby-Burney, friend of the show. When you think of 1066, various aspects of Anglo-Saxon culture came to an end. So we've talked about slavery, that's one aspect that comes to an end.
Yeah.
Which of these are we most saddened by? So Dominic, you're a romantic on this.
I am. So you see, what I mourn, Tom, is something that probably is utterly made up, which is the sort of the traditional liberties of the Anglo-Saxon, the ordinary, the Middle England, crushed by these Frenchified, and I'm sure that's utterly invented. But I kind of like the romance of the Norman yoke, and I suppose there's the sources suggest that actually Norman rule wasn't a bundle of laughs. I mean, people English sources say, they sort of wept and cried out and to God, such was the oppression. So I think there is obviously a sense of some degree of liberty or self-government or cultural integrity being lost, I guess. The other thing that's lost, of course, is the hair. Yeah, so there's a sort of hairiness to the Anglo-Saxons, isn't there? In the Bayeux Tapestry, don't they have moustaches and stuff? Yeah. So they look like the village people or something. And that's obviously been lost to some extent, hasn't it? I mean, as a clean-shaven person myself, I suppose I should
Are you never
applaud
tempted by kind of a Godwinson moustache?
I think I'd look ridiculous.
I think you should try it.
More ridiculous than I do now. You think so?
Yeah, I think you should try it.
Maybe. All right. What do you think's been? You're another Norman.
Well, for
man.
me, I think what gets broken is the distinctive quality of the English Church, and our sense of the saints, the Anglo-Saxon saints, which, as you'll know from we did the St. Cuthbert. St. Cuthbert does get appropriated. Quite a lot of them get appropriated, but because essentially the Normans move in and they take over all the cathedrals and the monasteries and everything, that sense of a kind of organic link with the pre-conquest church and its traditions and its saints, that gets broken. And I'm sad about that. Although possibly not as sad about the fact that you don't have a moustache. And I really think that you should seriously think about affirming your rights as a freeborn Anglo-Saxon by growing one.
Tom, one last question which has occurred to me from what you just said. Do you think that the fact that such a question is being asked by the Reverend Tim Vasby Burney and the sense of 2066 as a rupture and a lost sense of liberty, do you think that plays a part in English exceptionalism? England's sense of itself as distinct?
I think that I think it's very, very. When we talked about this right at the beginning about it, the role that 1066 plays in the secondary school curriculum, that it's right at the beginning.
Yeah.
I think that if England's exceptional, it's exceptional in the way that it enshrines as its national myth a story in which the English get defeated. I mean,
yeah,
that's not something that the Scots or the Americans do. It seems very, very odd, and I think that does kind of. I think it's always slightly served to qualify the English triumphalism, certainly, and perhaps
I think it reflects our enormous sense of self-confidence that we can do that, don't you think, Tom?
Possibly.
You have to be a really top nation to start with the defeat.
To celebrate a defeat. Yes, maybe,
Exactly.
maybe. Well, on that patriotic note, I think we probably better celebrate the end of 1066. We have another episode coming up, don't we, on Wednesday, a live episode.
Assassinations.
So the link, by the time this goes out, may well already be up. If not, it will be going up imminently. And yes, it's on assassinations. And then on Thursday, we have an episode in which we go through our list of top 10 eunuchs. And I think we're not giving a spoiler, are we? Harold isn't one of them. So
no, he's not. We've got some very good eunuchs, though.
Yeah, we've got
very good eunuchs.
Good eunuchs. We've got them. So we will see you hopefully on Wednesday and hopefully on Thursday. Thanks very much.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to The Rest is History. For bonus episodes, early access, ad-free listening, and access to our chat community, please sign up at restishistorypod.com. That's restishistorypod.com.